Hello, and welcome to this video tutorial where I need to close out of a few apps so my computer will actually run. Okay, I think we're in a good place. We could probably close one more. We're good to go. And then AI Writer just has this bad boy open. Okay, cool. Let's get into it. So, in this video, let me first open up the sales page for this particular product that we're looking at. Learn how to code with AI even if you have no experience in under an hour. That's the goal here. So here's what we're going to go over in this video. We're going to meet GPT-4. We're going to talk about a little bit of the differences between GPT-3 and GPT-4 and explore the unique features of ChatGPT versus the OpenAI API platform, the playground, which looks like this. We're going to next talk about the interface, right? There's chat.openai.com, which you're familiar with. It's okay. And then there's this playground, which does the same thing, but in a much more controlled and useful way. Then we'll have a bit of a crash course. We're going to get a high-level overview of coding and dive into creating your first next.js app in this case, though the same process also applies to Python, so I put that in there. And then I'm going to have you sort of walk through building the app, running it with me, and debugging it, so you can master the design process from conceptualization to production all in one go. And then we'll talk through how to debug things, how to add features, how to fix issues until your code is running smoothly. And then we're going to discover how to build new features, revise old ones, and expand your coding skills so you know where to go from here. So that's the goal for this video. In it, you're going to basically learn a bunch about how to work with GPT in any scenario, like customizing your prompts, really customizing things, making small tweaks in the way the things are worded so that you get way better output. Now, there's a tweet that this was inspired by, right? And that's this. If you want to have GPT-4 full stack scalable developer superpowers, here's the secret. I tweeted this out like a week ago or so, March 31st. So that was, yeah. It was almost a week ago. It will be a week ago tomorrow, which is really cool. And it's gotten 500,000 views. A lot of people have engaged with it. I've gotten so many people DM me telling me that they've actually tried this process. So we're going to take it and demo exactly the process as I did it. Just for full transparency, disclosure, it's going to be really fun. In fact, we'll take this system prompt right now and we'll paste it in there, okay? And then and then I'm going to build a new prompt that's even better than this. I've learned a lot in the last week. And so we're going to go through the prompting process together, where we'll try to make an even better prompt than this. And we'll talk a little bit about the special ways you can customize your prompts. But before I get into all of that, let's go back to the basics here. So whether or not you are into AI, you have probably already heard of, this is the wrong page, you have probably already heard of GPT. Whether you heard about ChatGPT or GPT 3.5 or GPT-3 back in 2020 or GPT-4, they're all different AI interfaces made by OpenAI. And GPT-4 just came out last month. It is their most advanced system, and it is, to recap, basically, it has passed most professional tests that people make, right? It has passed the bar, it's passed, you can read all this on OpenAI's website, right? But on the uniform bar exam, ChatGPT, which is GPT 3.5, got the 10th percentile, which is very bad. GPT-4 got the 90th percentile, which means it was better than 90% of humans on the bar exam with no special prompting. Here's the Biology Olympiad, which is another advanced test. 99th percentile, which is absolutely crazy, right? So GPT-4 is really incredible, and it allows you to do some crazy stuff with code. And so we're going to be using this playground interface, which lets you choose between GPT 3.5 or GPT-4 to do some coding for us. Now, you can also do all of this in the chat interface, which you may be familiar with. I'm not going to log in at the moment, but it's just a chat like any iMessage or anything you might do on your phone texting friends. The only difference between using this interface and the chat interface is that this interface has a lot more flexibility when it comes to going back and editing your previous prompts. It also has this control over what the system prompt says, and I use air quotes as I say system prompt. The system prompt is basically direction that you give the bot about what kind of bot to be. Now, if you want to give the bot a system prompt, but you happen to be using the chat interface, You can still do that. You would just put it in as your first message and then let it reply and be like, yes, I understand that. So put something like, okay. And so then you would let it reply to that, and it probably would. Ta-da. Right? And so then in the next prompt, you would go, okay, here's the code. And then you would paste in this next part of my tweet where you're like, okay, let's build an app. Here's what it is, right? And so anything that you see me do during this tutorial in the playground, if you don't have access to the playground yet, or your API access to GPT-4 is not turned on yet, you can do just as easily in the chat. Now, I want you to keep in mind that when you use the chat, sometimes you'll run out of context. You'll run out of tokens, and you won't know that the bot is losing the history. So I would just refresh your page, use a new chat often, and don't worry about what that means right now if you don't understand. You will see me do it over and over again during this tutorial, so you'll have an intuition for when you should do it yourself. Okay? So let's dive into it. I tweeted this yesterday. Tonight I'm going to build a full stack web app. I did this, it didn't work. I did it again earlier tonight. It didn't work again. And I say it didn't work just to mean like I skipped an important step that I think will add robustness to the video, because I want this to work for any video idea. And so I'm really, or for any app idea rather. And so I'm really trying to make sure that I cover every step in full detail, such that you actually have an outline to follow and you know it will work reliably every time. So I'm actually just going to take notes here. I'm not going to submit any of this. But just so you see it, the outline for this video. Now, again, this video is for anyone, no matter how familiar you are with code. So let's take just a dip over to GitHub, a quick jaunt over to GitHub. This is readme.md. It's in many development projects, and it's basically like an overview of how the code works, what to do with it to get it running, how you might make changes to the code that would be useful. And it gives you an overview of what code does. So readme.md is on many projects. And again, because GPT-4 has been trained on the whole internet, it knows what a readme should be. And so we're going to ask it first to generate a readme, because again, we're coming from a place of learning how to code, even if you never have used tech before. And so we want to do as much of our troubleshooting in plain English as we can. And so generating the readme.md will allow us to do that first. Okay? So that's what we're going to do first. And then when we get the readme.md to fully reflect all of the features that we want in the app, we're going to go, okay, to compiled and running. So we're going to generate the file tree, which will give us an overview of what the file system should look like the files and folders in this app. An app is usually just a set of folders that are executable files on a computer, and this app will be no different, next.js included. And don't get too worried about, next.js versus Python if you don't know what these are. Next just happens to be the framework we'll be using today, Next, along with TypeScript, Tailwind, and Chakra. You'll see those words a lot. Don't worry what they mean. Just know that this is a framework, one of the more modern frameworks, that happens to be super useful in a case like this, because you can output a lot of functionality with very little code, which is important because, again, we have a limit on how much text we can generate in any one prompt and have the GPT machine actually remember everything we're talking about. So we've got to be able to fit our whole app in a single prompt, and that's why we're using next.js. So generate the file tree and then generate the source code. Okay, so that's our outline here. So we're going to talk about making a README. We're going to give it our idea. It's going to write a README for us. We're going to tell it to ask us questions. And there's going to be a question step in between every single one of these steps. Debug or to rebuild? That is the question. There's, even if you've coded for your whole life, there is something about building with GPT-like products that I think informs a different way of making code. And so at the end of this video, or in the middle, it depends on how fast we get there, we will explore the question of, do we debug our app to build new features? Do we try to fix the errors that are in the code? Or do we just start from scratch? And I'll show you a really easy way to start from scratch once you have the core build. Okay, so that's our outline for the video. I wanted to take our first 10 minutes and just really set your expectations. These are the steps that we're going to be going through. And in fact, I will just put those right over here, just so we have them to reference throughout the video, okay? I'll come back to this. This is really cool. You're going to love this, and you get a copy of this. It's the most useful block of code you've ever seen in your life, okay? Here we go. So we'll come back to all that. I wanted to talk through. I had a lot of people propose ideas for apps, and I have tried a few of these, and they turn out to be doable but complicated. In this video, the first request I got was literally to make a GPT-4 chatbot that uses the GPT-4 app API, and I happen to have done that last week. But I did not record the process of doing it. And that's actually when I tweeted this. I used this same prompt to make that bot. And in fact, I pasted the exact prompt I used to make that bot right here. And so this took me an hour to make, and then an hour to debug, 2 hours total. And I got this when I was done, and it worked, as you can see. I took another hour that night before I went to bed. I cleaned it up, I added light and dark mode, and I made it so that it actually works quite well, and you can switch between ChatGPT 3.5 and ChatGPT 4. And you can see here it works, and it also stores your conversation history, which is kind of cool, with whatever you first said to it. So we're going to try to recreate all of these features in an app this evening. And you can see sometimes it takes a while to get a reply, especially from GPT-4. So we'll check back on this page. But I hit send, and I haven't seen anything yet. So yeah, that hopefully basically illustrates for you what thing we will be making. I want to do this one in a more advanced video later on, a self-service platform to log into multiple social media channels. I think that'd be fun. But I think that's a little bit too much for our 1 hour experiment. So we'll be recreating this. Now this is an app that has a backend, it has a server, it works, and it stores data both on the server and in user cookies, so that I don't have to re-enter my API key. Like if I open this in a place that doesn't have my cookies, you see it's asking me, what's my API key? And I would have to re-enter my API key, please don't steal it. And then I could chat with GPT-3 Turbo. Isn't that cool? And now when I refresh, oh, it's still there. Isn't that cool? Boop. So we'll try to rebuild all that functionality in our bot today, and hopefully someday ChatGPT will actually reply to us. GPT-4 takes forever. And so I think it'll be really fun. You have a concrete thing to expect, and we can tell if we've been successful or not because we'll be able to see if it builds. Ah, there it is. There's our reply. No wonder it took so long to get. Okay, well, we're not going to read the story that it told us. We're just going to move on. Okay, so let's get going. Our first step is to go from concept to readme.md. So we're going to start with a prompt related to the one I started with last week, but with a few adjustments to it. Okay, so you'll notice the one that I made last week is based on this template that I put in this tweet, where there are some brackets you would want to fill in, like what you want to build. So I'm going to copy and paste this. We're going to start there, and I'm going to customize it a little bit. Okay. And then in the interest of time, you can pause and read this, but in the interest of time, I'm actually going to pull in a version that is already made, that I made in the last video, just so we can keep this video under an hour. You're not going to benefit a ton from watching me rewrite it. So here is, spoiler alert, that's a little bit of the markdown file. I'm going to take out some of the stuff that doesn't need to be in here yet, okay? So you can see there's API docs in here. I'm going to reduce this back down to the main part of the prompt here, and I'm also going to get rid of the readme.md file. Here we go, because we will be remaking it. Okay, so here we go. Here is our prompt now. And this is just a modified and expanded version, again, of this, which is in my tweet, which will be linked right below this video if you want to reference it. So here's the original from a week ago. Here's the new version with what I know now. And I'm going to add a few things to it as we go here. So I'll read it just for clarity. And then if you want to, I have included versions of this system prompt and every other system prompt I use. I use a variety of them, right? Like here's another one that's similar but different. I use a variety of these different prompts in making apps, and so I've included all of them for you to reference. There's not a magic one. Like the ones that I use are all very different. Some of them do some things better than others, but most of them work well. And in fact, you could do this all without a system prompt. You could just leave this empty, and as a helpful assistant, it could probably do most of this. So I'm not going to take the time to read through the system prompt, but I will take the time to read through this so you understand why I'm saying what I will say. And then I will just say, if you feel the need to make adjustments to the system prompt, please do, because a big part of this is interacting in a way with GPT where you're not just taking what it gives you, you're working with it as you go to get more of what you want. Okay, so let's build a chat interface that looks like Facebook Messenger. I'm going to give it this input, and it's going to give me an output. So I want to structure this input such that we get a great README-MD file. So I'm going to read through it, and then I'll talk a little bit more about GPT-3 versus GPT-4 and some of these controls over here, and then we'll begin working. So that's where we are, just for context. We're now in the Choose Your Interface code crash course bit of the video, okay? So let's build a chat interface that looks just like Facebook Messenger. It should allow you to paste in your OpenAI API key when you first open the page, and it will save that as a cookie in your browser. Then it will use your stored API key whenever you open the website on the same device. In this section, I'm reading carefully through the prompt and then editing it to add any extra features that I want. I initially narrated this, but to be honest, my typing is really loud, and I don't want to annoy you to death. And then also, I think it's probably you can do this on your own. I don't need to tell you anything in particular. I'm explaining why we're using this type of Next app, and then I'm just basically making sure it includes all the features that I want in it, and I'm adding some pretty complicated features, so we really have a worst case scenario here. I want you to know that whatever app you develop is going to work, so I went with something kind of complicated so that we know it's going to work. Check for typos. It's really essential that your prompt does not have typos, because your code will have typos if your prompt has typos. Okay, moving on. Here is the relevant chat API documentation. It was released after 2021, so you may not know about it. Please use this to design. This concludes the chat API documentation. Let's resume our instructions for you. To build this app, we're going to take 3 major steps. Write a clear and complete README-MD that encapsulates everything I've told you here, okay? Make a directory structure that reflects all of the features of the app working and running in concert. And then write the code. Write the code to fulfill all of the functions described in the README and this prompt. Okay? For each step, you're going to ask me every question you can possibly think of, and then when I've answered all of your questions, you can do the next step. During step 2, by make a directory structure, I mean you should print the full ASCII project directory structure for a TypeScript-based next.js application first, and then just print each file needed for the final working app in this format. Here's the format. Okay. And now here's the last line, which is prompting it to begin the process. Before we do, please ask me any questions. Now this is key, and I really, like I said in our overview, I always have a question step between each of these. And in fact, I have a question step right here at the beginning before we even finalize our concept, okay? So this is what we're doing now. Please ask me any questions and I will answer them. Okay? And then I'm giving it a preview on what sections I want in the markdown file, because again, every README-MD is different depending on the goals of that developer. Like this one does not have a how to use our app section, but ours will, because I need to know that it understands how someone will use our app. So you can make up these sections. It does not matter what they are, but it knows that they need to be informational and they directly reference the code. And that's all we're waiting for. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a chance to ask me questions. Oh, there's one thing I need to talk about. Again, the chat interface uses these settings. These are the default settings. But I find often when generating code, it can be very helpful to have a temperature of 0. You can read what it says here. This controls randomness. Lowering results result in less random completions. Now I find that if you're going to debug You need to do less deterministic, more repetitive outputs because it will read every word and it will provide the most likely next word based on everything that you put in here. So, and then you can also increase your maximum length all the way up, which is also a benefit of using the playground versus the chat interface at chat.openai.com. Now we have 8,000 tokens we can use rather than 4,000 tokens, so we'll really be able to generate a lot of code. And once you've made those changes, temperature 0, maximum length all the way up, and make sure you're on GPT-4, then we're ready to begin. And the reason for that, again, is just that our code will be more reliable, it will match the style of our prompt more directly, and if we have a prompt without any typos, our code will have very few typos as well. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. I have a few questions. So here's how you answer the questions once ChatGPT gives them to you. Number 1 is for the chat interface, do you have any specific design preferences, or should I create a design that closely resembles Facebook Messenger? 2, when storing the API key as a cookie, do you have a preferred expiration time for the cookie? Should it persist indefinitely? 3, for the conversation history syncing between devices, do you want to use a specific database or storage solution? 4, when switching between models, GPT 3.5 Turbo and GPT4, should the conversation history be maintained or reset? 5, for the pricing display, should it be shown in real time as the user types or only after they receive a response from the API? There are any specific legal accessibility guidelines the app should adhere to, or should I follow the general best practices for web accessibility? For dark and light mode, do you want a toggle button? Should it automatically switch based on the user's system preferences? Regarding SEO, do you have any specific keywords or phrases? For the logo, you have an existing design I should create. A simple text-based logo. Interesting. Okay, and are there any social media platforms you want to optimize the preview images for? Wow, that's a lot of questions this time. Let's get into it. Okay, so 1, do you have any specific design preferences? No. Let's make it identical to Facebook Messenger. Those logos, all of it. 10. Elegant, tasteful gradients and drop shadows that match our theme. Logos, titles, all of it. Okay. 10. Are there any specific social media platforms you want to optimize? I have no idea if this is possible, but I'm doing it anyway. What additional questions do you have is how you end it. Because if you just ended at 10, it's just gonna be like, okay, let's proceed. You need to always ask it, what additional questions do you have? Until it tells you I don't have any more questions. Because it's always gonna have a few more. Especially if your answers are detailed. Number of tokens. Oh, also, before we get into the questions, I want to make sure I include the documentation. So let's look at platform. Here we go. Here's the chat API, and then token pricing OpenAI. Very good. So here is the chat completion API documentation. I told it that this was in its prompt and then I did not put it there, so I'm going to add it now. And this is again what I mean about the chat playground having more flexibility than the chat interface. If you were just on chat.openai.com, you would not be able to do this, but because I am on the playground, I can go back in and I can add the documentation right here. And now it's in there. And I can come back down here and let it print more questions. I'm going to add the API pricing as well before we do that, though. So here's, you know what, I actually have a slightly better formatted version of this in one of my replets. I'm going to see if I can, hold on. Do I have token pricing in here somewhere? Let's see if I have this stored in my clipboard history. I do. Killer. Brilliant. Okay, so please also calculate total. Yeah, that's exactly what I was hoping I would have in my history. Okay, so we also got to add that in there. Here we go. Please calculate the total cost. for each prompt based on the information in token length info in the reply. Okay. No more questions at this point. I will now proceed with creating the README file and subsequent steps. Okay. Please, all of this knowledge, and we wouldn't have to repeat ourselves. Brilliant. Let's get to it. And now here we go. So here is our first draft of the README file. And again, just to review our strategy here, we're going to have questions and then concept, and then questions again about the README file. And then we're going to generate code. First the file tree, and then questions, and then the code, and then questions. And then, guess what? Again, questions. And then maybe debug, and then questions. Okay? It's always important to go back and ask it, what's missing? What is missing from this? And so that'll be the first thing we do with this README. Okay? Now the README file is not complete, okay? Please write a spec for how you will use the chat API based on the documentation and the token pricing I gave you. And please write a detailed changelog from v1.0.0 to v3.8.5. Actually, let's not make it that crazy. How about 2.8.5 to 1.2.4 to you know what? We'll just let it decide when those upgrades happen. Okay. The goal here is to get it to come up with individual features and functions that we want to make sure really are working in the app. I'm just elaborating on my writing so that it's in real English, because it will generate better results if I write real English. Okay, updated README file. No, you don't have to start from the beginning. Please continue writing. Here's the rest of the README MD file. API. Okay. So you see I caught it there, and now I'm letting it continue. Whoa. Friend. Come on. Okay, well, it's fine. If it wants to repeat that line, that's very well. So this is a subheading. In Markdown, 2 hashtags is a subheading under 1 hashtag. API. I'm going to specify that it should document the format of the reply. And the only reason I'm doing this is so that we don't have to keep including the API docs in every prompt. Here we go. So again, you want to be really paying attention as it's generating these files and making sure that there's nothing that's missing. Obviously, you won't know to do all this the very first time you do it, but you will learn from experience. As you build more and more apps, you'll know what to look out for. So long as you're paying attention as it's generating and you can step in to interrupt it here, the more it generates later will be better because you added your input. And then you'll see how we compile all this here in a second, which will be very fun. This is interesting that it's just doing like one feature per version, just trying to get to the version that I told it about. I think that's pretty funny. With no like sub numbers either. There's no like 2.5.2. It's just going to go all the way up and then have 2.8.5 or whatever. That's so funny. Okay. Yeah, don't do that yet. I love that you want to do that, but don't do that yet. Okay. So this is useless. Minor bug fixes and improvements. Compliance is great. This is very good. It came up with a great list of things. Okay, so here we go. Version 1, 1.5, and 2.0. And now I'm going to prompt it with, actually it should know to continue to 2.85, so we'll see. Here's 2.5. Isn't this great? So now that I've sort of reconfigured it, it's going to start outputting a slightly different version of things. Isn't this so cool? Okay, and here's 2.8, and then maybe 2.8.5 as well. Oh, there's a user-friendly onboarding process now? Isn't that something? It's also cool that once you use all of its ideas, it'll start spitting out some much better new ideas, which is pretty cool. Hell yeah. Okay, that is one hell of a README file. Like, one hell of a README file, right? And now we're going to combine it all. So I'm going to grab this stuff, cut it, paste. Cut, paste. Again, I'm just making this into one continuous file as much as possible. And now I'm going to get rid of all of this stuff that was just fluff. And now I'm going to ask it my initial prompt. Don't you think you could get from the readme.md file? And I don't know if there's anything in here, but it's going to tell me no, which is great. Again, very key to have temperature set to 0 for really detailed prompts like this, else it'll just make stuff up. Now, for the sake of time, I'm just going to ask it to tell me the changes here. So just tell me the changes and where to add them. Okay, instead of reprinting the whole file. Beautiful. Come on. Okay. At some point, you just have to use your judgment and be like, well, we're done here. Okay, so now we have our markdown file. It's beautiful. I love it a lot. Now I'm just going to tell it to go ahead and give us the file tree. Here's the directory structure, okay? And then we're going to do the exact same thing. Again, let's revisit our outline. So we're going to do questions after we have our file tree. And these will be simple because the file tree is simple. It doesn't take long at all, right? No.